John Catt, who is hosting this late afternoon session. I'm Mary Myatt, and apologies for the slight delay in getting you all in. Delighted that we're going to be chatting to Michael about his tremendous book. The slight delay is because we've been trying to reach John Hattie, and we will warmly welcome him if and when he does come through. But the time delay means that it's really the middle of the night for him. So that might be the reason. However, it's wonderful that you're all here, and I'm delighted to be hosting the launch for your book, Michael. And so I'm just going to say a bit about you. Great, you're a geography teacher, you're head of department and leading across the trust at the King's Leadership Academy at Woolston. You're a contributor to the Oak National Academy. You're a council member of the Chartered College of Teaching. And your first book was Craft and the Feedback Pendulum. And we're here this afternoon to celebrate the publication of your second book, The Feedback Pendulum. And also to say that many happy returns because it's your birthday. Oh, so I'm sure everyone will want to wish you happy birthday as well. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Michael, but I also want to welcome Shirley Clark. It's just wonderful to see you, Shirley. And until I opened up Zoom, I had no idea that you were going to be here. So, Michael, before I ask Shirley to say a few words, can you just let us into how you managed to get Shirley and why you kept it a secret?
Well, I think that fundamentally, Mary, Shirley and John Hattie's book about sort of visible sort of feedback, visible, there it is, Shirley's and Hattie's book really sort of underpicked some of the thoughts and guided some of the ideas as I undertook my new book, really. And I wanted to share it with Shirley as well as John, and therefore give Shirley the opportunity to come and join us in this discussion. I did keep it a secret just so we could have a special guest, and but yeah, I'm pleased that Shirley's here as well.
Well, a very warm welcome to you, Shirley. It's great to have you. It was a lovely surprise. I'm just going to say a little bit about you and then move on. But you started up, like most of us on this call, as a classroom teacher. You then worked for the Inner London Education Authority, and then you were lecturing for 10 years at the Institute of Education. And you've undertaken research nationally and, as we all know, internationally, connecting those of us in England and the UK with these great minds across the world, including John Hattie and, of course, Dylan Williams. So you're very welcome here, and look forward to hearing some of your contributions. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure and an honour. Thank you.
So I'm going to kick off just by doing some of the quotes of what people have said about your book, Michael. Then, just so colleagues who are on this call, a few words from Michael about why he set out to write it. And then I'm going to ask Shirley for some observations, and also John, if he's able to join the call at some stage. And then we're going to open it up for discussion. So do put anything into the chat, and we will pick that up, and we'll be finishing at about 5:45 English time. But I'm just going to kick off by, I'm going to start with what I had to say about your book, Michael. I say, in the Feedback Pendulum, Michael Chiles provides insights and examples for tackling the fact that feedback, as we all know, does not always have the desired impact. This thought-provoking practical book helps us get there. It is time, colleagues, to tackle head-on the ghastliness and laziness of generic feedback. It's time to get shot of quality assurance that relies on book scrutiny and the amount of marking in pupils' books. And it's time to have a proper conversation about the power of feedback to improve the work of pupils and professionals. Highly recommend this book. So you've had this book endorsed by so many people, Michael, including Alex Quigley, including Kat Howard, so many who are really valuing what you have got to offer here. So I'm going to ask you now, if you'd just like to say a few words about why you decided to write this book after your first book.
Yeah, so I think that because I wrote about craft and knowing about how we craft our assessment, and part of craft was that idea of providing sort of feedback that enables our sort of students to feed forward and move away from, I suppose, what's historically been a real sort of emphasis on lots and lots of marking, and actually marking to meet a policy, but not actually having the desired impact to move pupils forward in their learning. And then the T part was all about target-driven improvement. And I felt that that was really important to actually go through a whole sort of discussion about, well, why do we give feedback? What is the purpose of it? Because actually, when we break it down and think about it, when I was writing about it, probably every single day, teachers are spending hours and hours giving lots and lots of feedback in all different sort of guises. But actually, how much of that is beneficial? And we talk a lot in the UK about, in particular, the well-being of our teachers, the amount of hours that teachers spend doing the job that's a really sort of important job that we know. And actually, we want to sort of make sure that that time is valuable and having those desired impacts for our students. So I really felt there was an opportunity to unpick it. And also, and I think that Alex Quigley said this to me when he reviewed it, and I suppose Shirley would agree as well, because she's gone through this with John Hattie and their book, that feedback's quite a difficult sort of topic or aspect of our teaching sort of pedagogy to look at. There's so many things out there, and when I went through the research, the amount of sort of conflicting, I suppose, evidence about, if you do this, this will have impact, and if you do this, this won't have as much impact. And actually, there's so much out there that I felt it really important to unpick it and give teachers some sort of guidance on how they could approach it.
Mm. I think it's what really struck me about it was that you really stretched this idea of feedback and really put a lens on the fact that we might have provided feedback, but whether what we broadcast is actually what is actually heard and acted on. But what I'm particularly interested in your unpacking a bit is where Chris Moyes has had some input on this in relation to the professionals. And so are you happy to say a bit more about that? Because I think this is a really interesting, important additional layer that you add to this narrative.
Yeah, and I wanted to go down that sort of strand of feedback being both for sort of students and, as you said, feedback for colleagues, for staff, and feedback for parents, and triangulate that, because actually those sort of core sort of stakeholders, three stakeholders, it's crucial to get that feedback process right so that it works for everyone involved in that sort of child's education. But yeah, I mean, Chris Moyes as well done some fantastic work on this idea of actually, as teachers, we're not there to necessarily prove what we're doing. We're there to work together with other colleagues to improve and to make our practice the best it can be for the students that we have in front of us, and for the colleagues that we have around us. And I think that's really important. And I know Sam Gibbs is here as well this afternoon, and I did a lot of work with Sam, fantastic work with Sam with the Ambition Institute a few years ago. And had a really, probably I would say in the 13 years I've been teaching, the best training in terms of coaching and how you can really sort of drill down to support colleagues to improve their pedagogy. And it was really, really powerful stuff. And like I say, Chris Moyes' work on that as well has really sort of contributed to the ideas that I've sort of put forward in the book about how we can approach the feedback that we give to colleagues, and that really helps them to improve.
Mm. And can you say a bit about, because you do develop this, I think, in a really interesting way, about the emotional and the affective side of it, and that, you know, to be continually thinking through, and this is a sophisticated piece of work to do, is how does what I say land with the person, whether it's an adult or a child, that I am having that conversation with? And you explore that in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I talk about this idea about those sort of what I'm saying are probably the key principles to feedback. And though I suppose what I try and get across in the book, actually, those principles can work both when we approach it with our pupils, when we approach it with colleagues, and when we approach it with our parents. Actually, it works hand in hand. And that idea of first of all creating a real sort of receptive culture, that people actually want to receive feedback. And I think I talk about how more often than not that we as humans, we have that sort of instinct of not wanting to get feedback from people, because we're expecting maybe for it to be something that we don't want to hear, and therefore we can be quite guarded at times. And actually it's about creating a culture in schools whereby it's building that reception, that receptive nature where people actually want to receive the feedback that they get. And also that idea, and again, Sam did a lot of work on this, and I learned a lot from Sam Gibbs on this, about this idea actually making our feedback granular, razor sharp. And it's, if we're doing it with colleagues and other teachers to help them really to improve, why we're not doing it with pupils, and why we're not doing it with parents. And that sort of razor sharp, granular feedback, really crucial. So that and John Hattie's quote, just part of the book, was fantastic about that idea of that, about when sort of feedback drops, how much of it is actually heard, and that idea that actually we can give a lot of feedback, but how much of it is actually being listened to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. This notion of it being granular, Adam Boxer did a really good video a while back about providing support for RQTs, or people early in their careers, and it being very, very tight and very specific. And of course, there's a growing body of work around that. So moving away from this bland genericism to something that really is meaningful, and that there's this the way it's delivered, there's a real willingness to want to act on it. And of course, I mean, Dylan Williams done all the classic work on this about it, making sure that it's not self-identified with the individual. But it just seems to me that the conversations and the way you've taken this lens has taken it to another level. Shirley, if I could ask you of any observations, either on where we've got so far, or on your work in general, and Michael's book, would be very welcome from you at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm sort of really, I spend a lot of time on when I do any of my talks, because I see it as the center of the formative assessment universe, is you talked about that culture for, if you like, children pupils being able to accept feedback in the first place. And what I've looked at is the fact that they need to have high self-efficacy in order to be able to receive any kind of learning or feedback. I mean, there's research that shows, forgotten who it is now, that even positive feedback will not be listened to if the child has low self-efficacy. So I've looked at the barriers to self-efficacy in schools, and unfortunately, it's almost as if our schools are set up to lower children's self-efficacy. Self-efficacy being their belief in their abilities to achieve. When we have grading, all that research that's been done about grading for every piece of work, when we have external rewards, all those things that compare students one to each other, and ability grouping, masses of research about the negative impact, profound impact of ability grouping. And yet the minute they go into secondary schools, there they go into their sets practically. And, there's so much work being done on this, and yet nothing really changes about those things. So it's not a surprise in a way that very often students have low self-efficacy. And I do think we've come a long way with those things in primary. As you know, that's my background. And it's still an ongoing battle. If we're ever going to get anywhere, we need to look carefully at the systems. And Carol Dweck's latest sort of thinking, talking about the misconceptions around growth and fixed mindsets, has been to try to put people right and say, it's it's not just about effort, it's about input, effort, time, and practice. But also, there's no good saying you will be able to do it and you can't do it yet and everything else if the structures and systems in the school actually contradict the whole, notion of growth mindset thinking. And it's those sometimes very simple things like children being partnered, regular mixed ability partnerships in the classes so that they're learning from each other, activated as learning resources for each other. I know there's also been, I don't know if you've ever read any of Jo Boaler's books about mathematics, and she cites quite a few schools that in secondary schools where they've, especially at Key Stage 3, where they've got rid of the sets and then the 5 maths teachers, let's say, do all the planning together and so on. I mean, there's a long way to go with all of this, but that to me is the heart of it. And that, it's welcome that you've included that in the book as a key feature. It doesn't matter what you do. Dylan William always says the only effective feedback is feedback that's actually used to make any kind of improvement. It doesn't matter how many times you look at what should I say, how should I say it. That's irrelevant. It's whether it's actually acted upon, interpreted appropriately, and then actually used to improve. So something else, I was really pleased that you talked about the importance of the perspective of the student, because one of the things we quote in our book is John Hattie's light bulb moment, where he realized, having thought that feedback was actually what the teacher gives to the student, he realized that the most important feedback, powerful feedback, is what the student gives to the teacher. And what he means by that is everything that's going on in front of you in the classroom, every single thing, whether that's children not understanding, being, disruptive, distracted, all of that is feedback to us. And I think if we can actually get to a point where you see it in that objective way, what do I need to do perhaps to change this, rather than what's much easier to do, which is to blame the children, blame, for all different circumstances, that's why that child's doing that or not listening or whatever. And I know it's a hard sort of thing to swallow, but I often say to people, are you absolutely sure that any other teacher would have exactly the same responses from the children as you are having? Or would another teacher maybe not have them misbehaving or not understanding? What's the difference? What's making the difference? And, it's hard, as I said, but I think it's about being more objective, more self-aware as teachers, which you very much pick up. So I love the case studies. Yeah. We've done that in our book, where you've got all sorts of anecdotes from teachers and so on, and it just brings everything to life. So, and I also love the fact that you've got these 3 elements, and you've got into a lot of depth and detail that we didn't in our book about, for instance, feedback to teachers, whether that comes from the student or whether that comes from anyone else, other teachers. We didn't really go into a lot of detail about that, or the parents. We did some of that stuff, but I do see this as a parallel book to ours, because ours does have a big primary focus, because I was, a key author in that, and that's my work, my background. All of my learning teams tend to be primary teachers and so on. And I see this as a fantastic complementary book with that more secondary, context.
Yeah, it's a very humane book, but also underpinned by real rigor. The range of authorities that you draw on is tremendous. And as you say, Shirley, thank you so much for that, is that, it really brings it alive when you've got these case studies. And I'm seeing that increasingly in the books that are coming out. It makes a huge difference.
It does.
So can I just pick up that point that you made, Shirley, about the parents? Michael, are you happy to say a bit more about the pendulum in relation to the conversations and the communication that we have with parents?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we have the parents on board, and I know that we've got Shane Eiston here, who's the sort founding principal of the school I'm at the minute, at the King's Leadership Academy, and definitely noticed that the relationship that you have with parents and the whole community around you is really important, and keeping that in the loop when we're giving feedback I think is vital to help our sort of our young people, the students we have in front of us, to support their sort of learning journey as they're going along. And I talk about like that importance of keeping that communication, and I often think that we spend a lot of time giving feedback to parents, but it's giving that feedback to them. We just give them feedback. We send them letters home to communicate stuff. We tell them how well they're doing or how not so well their child's doing. We tell them lots about their progress within a subject. We give them maybe grades or how they performed in a test. Are they above average or are they below average? But actually, often it's all about just give. It's just an information overload to parents. Naturally, it's about working a way of putting in a system or systems that allow that open dialogue, that open communication with our parents. It becomes more of a two-way or essentially a three-way process when we're including their child and the pupils that are in front of us within it. And I think that's really important. And that's something that we're working really hard to implement at the King's Leadership Academy as well, about getting parents really involved in their child's education, and really unpicking how they can support them. And I think that's, I mentioned it as well in the book, that I think we often assume, and the research indicates that as well from the Education Endowment Fund, we often assume that parents know how to support their child. We just make that assumption as educationalists and on a regular basis. And actually what we want to do is empower our sort of parents to be able to support their child and give them the sort of the knowledge, the tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge amount, I think, for the secondary context to learn from the best primary schools for who who've had this to the next level. I know Alison's work at the Wroxham School and masses of others and Simon Kidwell, Simon Smith's, Chris Dyson, all sort of really intentional about this. But it just pays so many dividends, but it's also so joyful for the professionals as well. So I think the secondary sector, I think, would do well to look at plenty of aspects of primary, but I think this in particular, because it does make so much difference to children, and that's got to be at the top of what we're thinking about. So I think there are a number of missed opportunities there that I think your work is drawing out, which is good. And I do know that the King's Leadership Trust across Liverpool and Warrington, I know them well, led by Sir Ian Hall, are doing tremendous work on so many levels, including this, which is fantastic. So I've kind of directed what I wanted you to talk about, Michael, just pulling those things out. Is there anything else that you would just like to highlight in this session before I then open it up to the chat? And I'm just going to give advance warning. It might be quite nice if Sam Gibbs wanted to unmute herself and video herself as well, and possibly Shane, Alison, or anyone else. That would be great. So Michael, before we do that, is there anything that you would like to flag up for the people on this call and also those who are going to be watching it later?
I think that I suppose the key thing that I'd want to bring up from actually going through the research and looking at all the different studies and examples and experiences that I've had through the schools that I've taught in or had the opportunity to visit, is that feedback is really, really powerful, and it will make a difference. But actually, how much of it is making a difference? And maybe it's an opportunity for leaders to step back and have a look. And is the feedback that is being given, whether it be to their pupils, whether it be to teachers, whether it be to parents, is it having the impact, or is it just a lot of information filling? Because that's what we're so used to doing as teachers. We're so used to giving feedback. Actually, is it having that desired impact? And that's why I really picked out John Hattie's quote, because I think that's really, really crucial. I think that was really sort of thought-provoking. in terms of how maybe we move forward with feedback.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to invite Sam, if you're up for that, just for any observations as you're on this call and you contributed. Don't have to.
Can't see you, Sam, actually. We could see you at the start, but...
Sam's unmuted, I can see. Sam, is there anything you'd like to say in relation to your contribution to this work?
Hi, Mary. Hi, Michael. Thank you. Sorry, you'd muted me, Michael. I was just trying to get back in. Hi, nice to see you all. Yeah, just I think kind of the key sort of takeaway for me really from this book is that, like many of the ways that we think about feeding back to students and what we know to be good practice in that area, we haven't really thought about much in relation to teachers. And actually some of the ways that we know that feedback can be at its worst, like quite damaging to pupils. I think the same can apply to teachers as well. And I talk in the book about, in my case study, about one of my experiences, one of my many experiences, kind of in that regard. So I think what's really useful and interesting that Michael's done just brilliantly in this book is to apply that focus to teachers as well. And of course we know that the impact that a really, really effective teacher can have on pupils, it's the most important thing. So it sort of stands to reason that quality feedback for teachers is going to have that impact on pupils. So yeah, I just think that's just a really fantastic focus that's really important and has been neglected, I think, thus far.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much. And sorry to invite you in without warning. You're really game for that, which is brilliant. Thank you. Shane, is there anything you'd like to add if you're happy to? I think I'm not sure whether people can unmute themselves, Annabelle.
Yes, they can.
Oh, great.
So
Shane,
you should, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and turn their video on, that's fine. I'm just finding him. I'll unmute Shane.
That's lovely.
I won't turn his video on just yet until we know he's happy for me to do that.
I've worked with Shane before, which will be fine.
Oh, it's not working for some reason,
And
Shane.
also to prime up Alison Peacock. Alison, if you're happy to make a contribution. So I'm being very opportunistic here, but when you see people, it's good.
We've got Katie Sharp as well, Mary, who's the Vice Principal at the King's Leadership Academy. She may
Katie, hello. Yeah, brilliant.
Hello.
Right, just seen you. Hi, Katie. Is there anything you'd like to add to this? Lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too. I should declare to everyone really that we're very proud to have had Michael join the school. I'm just overjoyed at what he can contribute to our mission. And just listening here, and before I get a chance to read the book, I'm really excited. I think one of the things you said, and I've written it down, is using feedback to not prove what we're doing as teachers, but to improve. And I think our profession is really, it's got this stigma attached to it that we have to mark to prove what we're doing. And that switch is going to be massive and has to be thought of at the forefront. And I've never come across a pupil, and I've worked in challenging urban schools to more middle class areas, and I've never come across a student who doesn't love having feedback in some way and as you say, that specific feedback is crucial, because children, like all of us, but certainly children, can spot something that isn't genuine or is generic, and they're the first to know when you haven't really thought about the feedback. They'll catch you up really quickly. So it's really nice that we're going to think about addressing that, and there's nothing better as a teacher, I'm sure we'll all agree, when a child disagrees with the feedback in some way and you've caused that ownership of their own work, and they say, Miss, you've given me this as a target, but I think that I've done that in all these parts in their work. And then you talk about why that was given as a target, maybe to move it on further, or maybe to just explore that to the next level. So I totally agree with using feedback as a real dialogue, and it's crucial that it is specific. But yeah, we're really looking forward to using all of Mike's and everyone here, all your contributions in our next CPD.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks for that, Katie. And Shane, are you happy to make any comments? Sorry for no warning. but you.
That's okay, Mary. Can I just apologise? I had a Tesco man turn up, so I could hear you speaking in the background. I thought I've got to go and tell the guy to bring the food round. So just to mirror Katie, we're incredibly pleased, obviously, to have Mike's research benefiting our pedagogy and our practice. And what we're really looking forward to seeing is the kind of the implementation of the stuff that's in the book and the work that he's doing, and seeing that permeate the school and his departments and the faculty. That's really exciting for us. And, I think we'll be able to see the fruits of that over the next 12 months or so.
And it has to be said, Shane, you and the rest of the team, both at Woolston and the rest of the trust, you're all doing great work. And I have to say, my heart sang because I followed Michael's work and interacted over some time. And then when I heard he was joining the King's Leadership Academy, oh my goodness. Absolutely fantastic. You're both really, really going to add value both ways. Just fantastic. So thanks for that contribution, Shane. And Alison, are you happy to say a few observations on what we've been chatting about?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I'd just love to congratulate you, Michael. Thank you so much. And I haven't read your book yet, but everything I've heard makes me feel really excited to read it. So that's on my list. I think it's really important that we don't underestimate children. Too often that's what happens. And they behave accordingly. So they rise to our perhaps mediocre expectation. And the way that we get beyond that is to provide feedback, but to have that conversation about what might you do next, and how do we build critical thinking into everything that we're doing in terms of children's work. Having said that, I don't want to imply that we need to return to that dialogic marking that was the bane of everybody's lives, not at all. But I do think it's about how we realistically help youngsters to view what they've done, think about what they could do even more, and how they could improve it, and have that kind of high bar that is set all the time. Challenge is something that children really love, whatever age they are, actually. And getting recognition for that is really important. So well done, and thank you very much for letting me have a word. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Alison.
So as we draw this to a close, thank you for your contribution, Alison. I just want to pick up on something that Shirley said around the mixed prior attainment. And again, I think this is where secondary has still got some way to go, but there are some schools doing some work around the mixed prior attainment groups. So I just want to give a shout out to the Endeavour Learning Trust, Ludi Jones and her colleagues there, mixed prior attainment all the way through, including maths and science. Maths is generally the tricky one, I understand that, but they're getting tremendous results across the board. Really, really interesting watching the work that they're doing and others following behind. So Shirley, could I just ask you, is there any final words that you'd like to say as we wrap this up, and then I'll hand over to Michael?
Yeah, something that's central to every teacher, whether they're primary or secondary, is the thing you talked about, this sort of the legacy of how well you mark being somehow an indication of how good a teacher you are. And still, I think it's very hard for some teachers actually to let go of they feel safe, I think, even if it's taking hours, because that somehow has been linked for decades with their accountability. Yeah. And I think what we have to do is get back to what John Hattie talks about with visible learning, which is looking objectively at the impact of what we're doing, rather than, and there's a school, you probably have heard of the school in Oxford, gosh, it's gone out of my head. Anyway, where on there, you probably know who I'm talking about. She has in the staff room 2 questions. Why are we doing it? Who is it for? And every policy decision they make, Flora Barton from Cromarsh School in Oxford, every single policy decision they make, if it isn't about the child, if it's about parents or it's about Ofsted or whatever, then it's not good enough. And the impact is something actually we all know. So I think in the end, it comes to getting back that sort of professional judgment and confidence to be able to say, what is the balance between spending hours marking and preparing for a lesson? I mean, we're not saying abandon all marking whatsoever, but very much focusing on what I'm advocating now, which is on the move, pen in hand feedback throughout a lesson. Never sit down at the desk. You know, I mean, early years teachers are on the move all the time, but the older the kids get, the more we tend to stand back and then do any kind of feedback later or through marking. If you're on the move with a pen in your hand, you can be actually, you know, intervening throughout the lesson. There can be mid-learning lesson stops. There can be taking a child's work under the visualizer and analyzing it. So there's so many strategies for ongoing feedback that actually in the end make that sort of one comment seem absolutely pointless and trivial. So I think we just need to get that confidence back to be able to say, these are the things we're doing during lessons. Actually, whatever we write to students has limited impact, but we know when it does have impact. So that's when we're going to use it. And I think that's the greatest gift we can give all teachers, actually.
Shirley, thank you so much. And at this point, I'd like to welcome John.
John.
Hi, John.
Can you hear us, John?
Hi, folks. I say good morning. It looks like I've got the conversion wrong with daylight saving. It's 4 a.m. in the morning here, and obviously it started at 3 a.m. But it's good to be here.
Well, we are so grateful that you have made it. Michael, I'm going to say to you, would you like to just summarize what we've done and then allow a few thoughts from John? But it's just great to have you on this call, John. Michael.
Yeah, so thanks, Mary. So yeah, John, we've just been discussing really about sort of underpicking the sort of core sort of theories that I've talked about, and the strategies, potential strategies for schools to use, and really looking at, as Shirley and I spoke about, this idea of having that sort of triangulation and really having that powerful feedback that's supporting both our students that we work with, the parents that we work with in the school community, and also our colleagues, the teachers around us, and just the real importance of working with everyone to really bring about some powerful feedback. And that sort of core bit about, and I know that you talked a lot about it as well, about actually how much of the feedback is having an impact. We give lots of feedback as teachers all the time, every day, every minute of the day, and we probably spend a lot of hours on it, but actually how much of that is being heard, and how much of that is having that desired impact.
And I'm sure Shirley has talked about this, but the notion of, as you just said, Michael, and this is what comes across in your book so strongly, was the feedback heard, understood, and actionable? And it's really quite illuminating when you get teachers to get students to write comments about the feedback they've received. It's a bit sobering, actually, and it's a really powerful way to hear what your impact of the feedback is. And so the way you've switched the whole conversation from giving it to receiving it, I think it's very, very powerful.
John, could I ask you, as there's so much written about feedback, so many quick tricks that don't go that far, so much commentary on it. So I'm just interested to know why you, with your experience, and similarly with Shirley, why you were involved and why you wrote the final commentary for Michael's book. What to you is distinctive about it? What really struck you about his work? Because you must get so many requests, and it's just tremendous that, you know, you've contributed to this as well. Makes a huge difference.
It's the first time, though, Mary, I've ever been asked to write a final conclusion to a book, though, so that was quite unique. Look, you're right. And Shirley and I have talked about this probably for 10 or 15 years. Like, we've always known that feedback is very powerful, but unfortunately, it's also the most variable of all influences. And I remember talking a few years ago to one of your ministers of education in English, and he was very proud, and he said to me, "You'll be so pleased, John," he said, "I've listened to what you've said, and I've decreed that here in England, next year is going to be the year of feedback." Now, I lost all credibility in his eyes with my next comment, and I said to him, "Well, that's interesting, Minister. What do you do the year after? Non-feedback?" And it didn't go well after that, I have to confess. But the problem is that we all talk about it. We all know it's important. but we get it so wrong. And like, we had pressure on us to write the book that Shirley and I did probably 10, 15 years, but we refused until we understood that variability. And one of the main things about that, solving that variability problem, that up to 1/3 of feedback can have a negative impact. I give you feedback today, Mary, it works. I give you the same feedback tomorrow, it doesn't. And we miss the major point in that. And this is what I liked about Michael's book, is he kind of got it. It was turning it around and putting it on its head and saying, let's not stop focusing on how we give, and let's start focusing how we receive. I was trained years ago as a Rogerian counsellor in the counselling business. And we were told, Carl Rogers made the statement back then, he said, at the start of any counselling session, the first 3/4 of the time should be you listening. And I think as teachers, we underestimate the power of listening. And that's what comes across throughout the book, is how do you listen to the feedback that's received? And I think that whole focus that comes through is what I'd like to see, and I'm sure Shirley would agree, as a mind change about how we see feedback and looking at it in terms of the student's eyes. You probably know from my work, I keep saying it's getting teachers to see learning through the student's eyes. It's getting teachers to see feedback through the learner's eyes. I don't know about you, but I've survived in life because I'm a very good selective listener. I know that when I get feedback, it costs. I have to do it again. It's wrong. And so it's a lot easier not to hear the feedback. 8-year-old kids are brilliant at it. We have to take that into account. If you've got teenage kids, I bet the thing you say to them more often than not is, now tell me back what I said, because I don't think you understood what I said. Of course they didn't. That's selectively listening to it. Well, that's the problem with feedback. We give so much, most of it's not heard. And so that's why that theme that comes through is heard, was it understood, and was it actionable? That's the reason that I was so attracted to what Michael was written.
That's real affirmation for you, Michael, and your deep thinking on this. It's a really elegant addition to the commentary. Michael, could you give us a wish list for what you'd like to happen as a result of this publication?
I think that,
what would your birthday wish be?
My birthday wish, yeah. I think that as John rightly said, I think I want the idea, or I suppose the analogy of the pendulum is I wanted it to be seen as something that was continually happening, but that actually that upswing of that pendulum is gearing towards the way in which we're receiving that feedback and really focusing on that, because I think that's really important. And like, it took me a while to write it, only because there's so much out there. And as John and Shirley have rightly said, there's so much conflicting evidence out there, so many different studies, so many different variables of what is powerful feedback and not powerful feedback. But in a lot of those studies, they emphasize that bit about actually, if feedback is going to be powerful, if it's going to have that desired impact, if we're going to invest so much time in it as we do, not just in education, but in our day-to-day lives with families, when we go out, when we communicate with anybody around us, what are we doing about the way in which it's being received? And then what are we doing in terms of taking the actions from it, but also helping people to do that, because often people don't have that skill set, or they don't necessarily interpret the feedback in the way in which that we're anticipating giving it. And I think that's crucial as well. I mean, we give feedback, and people do hear it, but do they hear what we want them to hear? And I think that is also crucial as well.
Yes, that's great. I'm going to suggest we round up and bounce this on people, that we each of us who are the four of us who are on the kind of panel, just give a quick example of when we've had really profound, good, solid feedback. This is all very, we can all think of the frightful feedback. While you're thinking, I'm just going to give an example of mine. Two very quick examples, actually. One, when there was a launch of a piece of work that I was doing with some colleagues in religious education, and a well-known bishop was involved in that one. We were sitting down and talking, and I have never had anyone professionally deeply listening to the way that he listened to me in terms of the questions he just continued gently asking me based on the headlines of what I was giving him. And the second one was when I needed some pretty tough feedback when someone was giving me some quality assurance, and my work was being quality assured when I was inspecting. And that was potentially pretty tricky, but this chap took me for a walk at the end of it to unpack some of the stuff. And so we weren't face to face. I think there's not enough talk about, you know, where the positioning of this is, particularly with adults, but I think also alongside children. When do we get alongside them? Which of course is the heart of assessment in any case, but figuratively as well as literally. And I think hearing these messages side by side as one professional to another, really, really tough message, but not personal, but about my practice. You know, I can still picture it to this day, really sharp, very pointed, you know, no stone unturned, but left me feeling whole. There was nothing diminishing about me as a human being. And I think, you know, I think we all need to think of times when we've had really great practice and we've been on the receiving end of that, so that we carry that forward. Shirley, has that happened to you? Can you think of anything where it's happened well?
In my brains, and I'm thinking that without any very specific examples, the feedback that I have acted on and improved on has always been negative, rather than positive. That's what I've really thought about, and probably started off by being devastated, you know, maybe cried, maybe whatever. But that I know as what's made the difference, that I've been able to take that and think, yes, yeah, and own it and move forward with it. Now, you know, what do you need to have in place as a person with your self-efficacy and everything else to be able to do that? Because I fear that many students actually hear the negative feedback, whether it's wrapped up with positive words or not, or even just simply by being next to someone who's doing the stuff much quicker than them. You know, that in itself is feedback. Oh God, you know, they can do it, I can't. And I think it's, you know, we need to be able to find out how to get to that place where you receive negative feedback and be able to take it and move forward with it. You know, lots of people have said to me when I run courses over the years, when I do an input anywhere, oh, when you get the evaluations, don't take any notice of the 3 or 4 that will be negative. Only, you know, they're just in the minority. Those are the only ones I tend to really look at. Yeah. And I'll spend sleepless nights going over it, because I think, you know, those could be the few people that have really got some deep understanding here, and I, you know, I want to move forward. I don't just want followers and fans of my word is God. I want, you know, people who are really critically thinking about what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So you know, that's
really helpful.
all I can think of.
And John, I think you had something similar, you know, in your closing words for the book, but you might have another example as well. But there's sort of a curious mix of both pain, but actually shifting it on our practice.
I want to follow up Shirley's line. The hardest thing in my life in academia is finding someone who's prepared to tell you
yes, right,
the critical as well as the positive without it being emotionally negative. Like, feedback can be quite emotional, and those people in my life have been extremely rare. And I pick out Shirley as a wonderful example. We have our breakfast, our lunch, and oh my God, she says, that's nonsense, John. And she does this quite strong. And it's such a pleasure to find someone who could do that, and you can walk away as great friends. That's what I would want in all teachers, is to have that kind of critical friend that is critical without the negative emotion. Thank you, Shirley.
Wonderful. That was gold.
Perhaps it only works though when you have I'm thinking of teacher-student relationships. John and I have a good relationship, and maybe he would see it very differently, anything when I say something's rubbish, if he didn't respect me or didn't, you know. So it's subtle, isn't it?
It is, but I don't think it's insurmountable. And you know, without going off to tangent, I think some of the coaching and the psychotherapeutic field has something to offer here. You know, I'm okay, you're okay, this kind of thing, which can be done very explicitly and quickly, but actually you've got to be really intentional about it. So Michael, I'm going to hand over to you to wrap up in terms of this wonderful session launching your great new book.
Yeah.
So over to you.
Thanks, Mary. And I think that just to pick up on what Shirley and John said, I think that's why one of those other principles I talked about is creating that receptive culture, because without that receptive culture, without that relationship that Shirley and John have, that feedback wouldn't have the desired impact. And I think that's really important as well. We give lots of feedback, but do we have that right relationship in place first? Is it receptive? And therefore, is it being well received? Because I agree with Shirley, actually. It made me laugh, actually, when she said about best feedback is when she's had the negative. Actually, sometimes it is, because you're like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong now. You give me that negative feedback. No, I'm going to turn it around to something positive. And maybe there is something about our human instinct and nature to, although we don't like negative feedback, when we get it, it actually triggers something in us, in our inner self, to want to actually turn it into something positive. And I suppose that comes back to that idea that often we as teachers wrap around a lot of feedback, as Shirley said, with lots of positivity. We need to give them lots of positivity, because otherwise we're going to knock them down. And no, it's not about giving like really harsh feedback, but finding a way to give that feedback when you've got that relationship that is then actually helping them to move forward, and not just saying, oh, that's a really good piece of work. Oh yeah, fantastic, really well done. And actually having that impact that you want it to have. But just want to say really big thank you to yourself, Mary, for hosting it for us, and a big thank you really to John Catt for publicising the book for me, and a huge thank you to John, not just for getting up so early in the morning, but also for doing the closing thoughts. I really appreciate it. And to Shirley, that sort of special guest that I didn't reveal, for coming and joining and having the time to read it and share your thoughts. I really appreciate everything. And I've noticed as well, we've also got Jay Davenport here, who did a spotlight, and Amy Searle as well as Sam Gibbs. So it's lovely to see them come and listen and hear from everyone.
Great. Well done, Michael. Enjoy the rest of your birthday. We've got comments coming through saying they're really looking forward to reading the book. I'm sure it's going to have great impact on the sector. And to thank Annabelle for hosting this via John Catt. Okay, so great. Thank you very much indeed, colleagues, for joining us, and have a good rest of the evening, those of you in the West. And John, the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Bye then all.
Thanks.